hello again. I went ahead and decided to do a second reading of Dolor and Shadow today. I'm going to go ahead and read Chapter 1. I'm wanting to read as much of the beginning as I can during this, so I'm probably going to do 2 readings a day just to get through it. And as I said, you're more than welcome to listen to whatever you want. For the record, because I just stared at a video the entire time and went, "What is that?" trying to figure out exactly where it is in the background. This is tape. That's all. It's boxing tape that I purchased so I could mail out my books when somebody wins something. And like I said, my cat was like aligned in the last video when I was doing featured author for Marlene Kallan. And the way it looked, it was like this blue blob was in the back with my cat, Cookie. That was Cookie, by the way, with a bath in the middle of the reading. And I'm just staring at it the entire time going, "What is that?" So I always assume that if I'm sitting there perplexed, so are other people. So, also, just to know, I don't delete and re-record when there's errors because that's just part of personality, and I've got lots of it, so I just go ahead and use it. That's Colby. I've got 3 of them around here, and you'll probably see them wandering about. See? It looks like it's lying in the middle of the floor. Okay. This, Dolor and Shadow, I'm going to read the beginning of part 1 now. I read the prologue recently. This is part 1. And just for the record, because I'm the kind of person, when I read through books and I see that it's broken up in parts, I have this massive amount of anxiety. Is there going to be like a part 5 that I'm reading through? So this is it. This is part 1. That's all of part 1. And then it goes into part 2, which has a massive time jump in it. Not that massive. They're elves, so it's really not that massive. And it's not really important, but that's it. Part 1 and then part 2 is the rest of the book. So I'm hoping to get through part 1. That is my goal. And I will probably do any kind of reading I can to get through part 1, at least part 1 for this blog hop. So I've rambled enough, so I'm going to read now, which is really what you're here for. All right, Chapter 1, Dolor and Shadow. Lorlenalin. Yeah, that's what it says. Lorlenalin. It's the city. Eric, the king's high marshal, towered over the refugees in Lorlenalin's keep as he made his way through the moonlit halls. Sleeping families had done their best to nestle up for the night on the stone floor. Every passage and stairwell overflowed with Alfheim. No one had room to stretch out. His men performed well considering the circumstances, but still, 90,000. He glanced into one of the countless rooms filled with more than 24 people. Only this morning he had used most of the rooms for storage. Now children slept sitting upright against their mothers. 90,000. He couldn't believe the report when he heard it 2 weeks ago. He and his men did well to prepare, but seeing this many refugees arriving at the steps of his keep without home or food had been enough to shock him into the reality of the numbers. His keep simply could not house them all. Outside, his men erected tents, thousands of tents, along the outer battlement. Alongside the river and even the waterfall, they had pitched rows upon rows of tents that would serve as permanent housing for the Schwaltefar until his men could build proper establishments. He still wasn't sure where he was going to put them all until then. The spring nights could get cold. Eric stopped at a closed door in the hall where orange light seeped through the crack of the floor and spilled onto the stone. The quiet whimper on the other side pulled at his broad chest. He uneasily shifted the sword on his hip and pushed the door open. The room was laden with simple fixings, fine enough to belong to a field marshal. A desk, a table, no ornamentation. On the wall beside a door that led to a balcony hung a tapestry embroidered with a Schwaltefar seal, a hammer intertwined with a tricorner knot. The same seal the smiths had engraved into the armbands worn by all the king's men. On the bed, Kallan sat, sobbing softly on King Eyolf's lap. From the red of his dry eyes, Eyolf had found more tears to shed for his wife. Kallan stared wide-eyed, her lapis eyes swollen and red like her father's. The child lay with her fist pressed into her mouth, uninterested with anything he had to say. "Dagon's ready," Eric said. Eyolf dug at his eyes and nodded. Despite having reached his elding ages ago, gray now streaked the black of his shoulder-length hair and his full beard. The eternal youth of the king had waned since last they met. Exhaustion pulled on his face and made him appear much more like a middle-aged human instead of an Alfar king blessed with the eternal life of his people. Eyolf returned his hand to his daughter's back. "How is everyone?" he asked. How have the Dolor settled? Eric furrowed his brow. Dolor? That's what they're calling themselves, Eolf said. I'm not sure when, really. Along the way they started, I think. The name just stayed with them. We found everyone abed. My men are still working on the latrines. I have another group working on food supply. Eolf nodded wearily. What of the others? Eric asked. Have you heard anything? No. The Schwarzenfar who stayed behind were not happy with my decision. Eric watched Eolf tighten his mouth. His lip had started to shake. I urged them to come with us, but they wouldn't abandon the fight. How many? Eric asked. Eolf rubbed his face. More than half? 120, maybe? Nausea flipped Eric's stomach. 120,000 left in Alfheim. He tried to imagine the number of Alfar who had chosen to stay behind as the city went up in safe flame. He and Gudrun alone knew it was the flame. He was certain to keep it that way. Eric shook his head. They won't make it. They wouldn't listen. Eric heard the grief swell in Eolf's voice. And if I stayed to fight that battle? Kallan sniffed, and Eric watched a tear spill down her nose. I had no choice but to protect those who I could, Eolf said. How is she? Eric asked, nodding to the child. Eolf made a conscious effort to rub her back again. About as tired and scared and grief-stricken as the rest of us. I have time, Eric said. I can take her if you wish. Eolf nodded and placed a hand on her head. Kallan? Eric watched her eyes wander, then focus. I have to go. No. She sat up, her lip trembling as she looked to her father. No, I don't. Eric is here, Eolf said. He'll watch you. No, please. What if I'll be right back? For his daughter, Eolf forced his best smile. You must be strong. I'm not strong. Kallan shook her head. I'm not. Eolf planted a kiss on the top of her head and stood from the bed. I'll be right back, he whispered, and nodded to Eric before heading out the door down the hall. Eric watched the princess pull her legs into her chest as she gathered the furs around her and dropped her face to her knees. Her long brown hair fell to the bed, shielding her face from the light. Kallan. Eric walked to the bed. I miss Ori. The furs muffled her voice. Eric sat on the bed in front of her. I know, Kallan. He tried to smile. He'll be all right. And Grandmama? Kallan continued. Eric nodded. Gudrun will be here soon. I miss Mommy. Tremors tightened his body. Kallan looked up from her knees. I want Mommy. Eric clenched his teeth until he was certain they would break and held his breath until the pain eased enough for him to speak. I know. He swallowed the knot in his throat. We all do. I couldn't save her. No one could, he said. But I really could. Kallan tipped her head, insisting. A beam of light caught her eyes, illuminating the rings of gold, encompassing her iridescent irises. Eric caught himself from exclaiming. I wasn't strong, Kallan said. Father says I am, but I'm not. Another tear. Mommy wasn't strong either. Kallan buried her face back to her knees and cried. She mustn't know. Eric leaned closer. They were no longer alone. Kira was strong, Kallan. Kira was. His eyes burned. Very strong. Not like Daddy, Kallan said, raising her face to Eric's. Not like you or Dagon. Eric gently cupped Kallan's chin, which appeared dwarfed by his fingers. There was no mistaking the prominent ring of gold. If she hadn't been crying, if Ale hadn't been greeting, they all would have seen it too. Kira had strength, Kallan. Then why is she dead? Her eyes searched his face as if she would find the answers there. If she was strong, then why? A tear escaped him, and Eric closed his eyes, cursing Eolf. He never should have left her. Not when he knew Danon was hunting them. He was a fool for obeying his king. Kallan pulled her chin away and dropped her face back to her knees. I want to go home. She needs to forget. And what will you do there, Eric asked. She must forget. I could find her, Kallan sniffed. Ori and I would find her. Eric watched her silent thoughts fly, and Kallan descended into another bout of crying. If she forgets, her grief will end. Come here, princess, Eric beckoned, and picking up the child from his bed, he pulled her into his lap where she curled up into a ball. It hurts so much, she said. I just want it to stop, to cut it out of me if I were stronger. And what if you were stronger? Eric rocked. Then I could go back and get her. I could have saved her. Not all her memories, Eric decided. Only some. And her sight. Surely her sight must go. If she sees, then she'll know. And if she's anything like her mother, Eric continued to rock her back and forth. There are things she cannot know. She's already knows enough to figure out things when she gets older, if she remembers. She cannot remember. Eric? Yes, Princess. Princesses aren't strong, she said. Do you think I will be strong? Yes, Princess, Eric said. You will be strong. Like you and Dagon and Father? He felt her hair brush his chin. Yes, Princess. Just like Dagon and Eolf. And you? She asked. Eric placed a hand to her forehead. And I, Eric whispered. Threads of gold like sand flowed from his hand and encompassed Kallan's head. Through her body he reached with his scythe until he located and linked the golden strands within that harbored her power. One by one, he tugged on the strands and pushed his own scythe inside them until his scythe bound hers and pulled and changed its direction. And Gudrun, Eric said, just like Gudrun. He withdrew his scythe, leaving hers alone to flow in the new direction. Already the child slept. Carefully, he laid her back on his bed, pulled his furs up around her, and kissed her brow. Good night, Princess, he muttered. Several times, excuse me. Several times he rubbed his hand over his face and made his way to the balcony. He needed air. The sea crashed upon the jagged rocks that made up the base of the keep carved into the mountain's side. The black waters greeted him as coldly as a late winter chill. Eric breathed deep the sea air, expanding his chest as far as it would go. Before he released that breath, he knew she was there. What did you do to her? Fan said. Slowly, Eric turned his head to the woman leaning too lax against his balcony. Her golden irises gleamed with that same nonchalance that urged him to attack her. I sealed off her memories, he answered with a tone of disgust, and pulled his attention from the goddess. Fan tucked a strand of black hair behind her white tapered ear. It won't work, she chimed, too happily for the dreary mood of the keep. Eric stared at the generous curves of her body. What are you doing here, Fan? You didn't kill her. Eric looked back. The nonchalance was gone. In its place, fury peered from her golden eyes. Our agreement was that you kill her. I didn't agree. You proposed, Eric said. I'm not going to kill a child. She won't always be. Eric took a step toward the railing, adding several feet of space between them. She's hidden, he said. Danon won't find her. She doesn't even know Kallan exists. You think Danon won't find out? Fan pushed off the railing. Granddaughter to the great Drui, and you think Danon can't find her? Fan stepped in, closing the space Eric had reserved between them. Kira is dead, Fan said, shoving her face uncomfortably close to Eric. Danon is hunting you in Gudrun. Eric's throat tightened at the sound of Kira's name. Kira didn't make it, he said, and formed a fist when Fan cocked her head in feigned pity. Oh, so sorry. We blocked Danon's vision, Eric said. We blocked her sight. Danon cannot find us. Fan shrugged with a grin that encouraged Eric to leap off the balcony. There is still Volund, Fan said. Eric's back stiffened as he held his breath. Volund is unpredictable, Fan smiled. The moon did well to illuminate her face. Eric had to force himself to look away. He doesn't know where Kallan is, he said, knowing how little that mattered. It's Volund, Fan said. He will find out. Gudrun and I are both with her. Gudrun isn't. Fan tipped her head ever so slightly. The black strand of hair fell back to her face. Where is Gudrun, Eric? I don't know. He felt her eyes scrape him over. You're telling the truth, she said. He could hear her smile thaw. You really don't know. The space between them eased as he felt Fan back away. That child is better off dead than alive to me, Fan said over her shoulder. If Danon even suspects there was a child, you will not kill Kira's daughter, Eric said, meeting Fan's narrow eyes. She would never have you. Fan turned and walked to the edge of the balcony. The wind whipped her black hair about. Where are you going? Eric called. If the mood suits her, Danon can track me, Fan answered, staring over the sea. If I stay too long, it will raise questions. Once Danon withdraws her troops from Alfheim, she will begin looking for you, and Gudrun. Once that happens, if I go near that child, Danon will find her. You will not kill Kira's daughter. You can have your precious princess, Fan said, and released a chuckle. But the moment Danon finds her, the moment that child knows, I'm coming for her. Eric paid no mind as Fan took the shape of a raven. With feathers as black as her hair, she flew into the night, leaving Eric alone with his princess. Okay, that is it for chapter 1. Again, please subscribe if you enjoy the reading and are looking for more. Also subscribe to my website. And again, this is Dolor and Shadow. I just finished reading chapter 1 of Dolor and Shadow. A little redundant. Alright, thank you very much and have a good day.